The targeted killing of 27 men, mostly tourists, in the town of Pahalgam, Kashmir, is the largest attack in the region since the year 2000. The group who took responsibility for the killings is known as the Resistance Front, or TRF, also known as the Kashmiri Resistance. There's not going to be much editing in this one. I've got a full time job. Besides this, gotta pay rent, don't have an editor. But just wanted to say something about the situation because it's not often that the world suddenly cares about Kashmir, which is the grotesque nature of this algorithm driven world. I mentioned that the resistance front took responsibility for the attack, but there is still a party who hasn't claimed responsibility for anything, and that is the current Indian government, who is clearly at fault for the lack of action and the lies it peddled just days before saying that the area was safe for tourists. Not only that, on March 28th, the previous month, four Kashmiri rebels had offed four policemen in the region. Two of the rebels escaped and were still at large due to the incompetence of the occupation forces. Considering this is the world's most militarized zone with at least 700,000 Indian armed forces in the region, any eyes from civilians and the world should be squarely looking at what the military is doing in the region with that many people and why a resistance force formed in the first place. Why would you open up this zone for tourism? Right now, a lot of Hindu nationalists and the worst elements in the country and around the world are trying to turn this event into fuel to spread Islamophobia against random Muslims in India who have nothing to do with this. The algorithm will probably feed this video to a lot of those people looking to join in on the hate right now. One glance at the comment section of any media covering this, and you'll see that unfortunately, this event is already being used by Hindutva far right groups and even Indian liberals to demonize all Muslims. Comments basically saying that all Muslims are terrorists in one way or another are getting thousands of likes, praises all over the place. The Indian population has been primed for decades with anti Muslim propaganda to have this reaction, as the same response isn't generated when Hindu terror groups are given this designation. People don't say the VHP are terrorists, therefore all Hindus are terrorists, or the KKK are terrorist Christian groups, therefore all Christians are terrorists. The media isn't mobilized or incentivized to cover events like Dalits being murdered every day, either because the priority of political parties in this country is only the Hindu Muslim divide. But I digress. With many essentially calling for the locals of Pahalgam to be punished as well. Some commenters try to talk people down in the comments, but it's clear that a lot of people are calling for revenge, mirroring in many ways the Israeli response to the Hamas attack. And just like in that situation, some questions must be asked. Who is this resistance group? What are they resisting? Why is Kashmir contested? How does all this affect the people who actually live there? And why do people who don't live there have such strong feelings about either India or Pakistan taking over? The history of Kashmir didn't start with this attack, and it didn't start in 2019 either, when India stripped Kashmir of its sham of a special status. It didn't start in 1947 either, when India gained independence. Kashmir's oppression and colonial exploitation started long before India came to be. Since the Mughal Empire annexed the region in 1589, Kashmir has never been ruled by Kashmiris themselves. Mughal rule was followed by Afghan rule from 1753 to 1819, followed by the Sikhs in 1819 to 1846, and then the Hindu Rajput Dogras from 1846 to 1947. Oh, and the British had a large hand to play here since their war with the Sikh Empire. All the powers I mentioned before, from the Mughals to the British to the Dogras, no matter what religion or whatever identity marker you want to throw on history, had one thing in common. They wanted to exploit the Kashmiri people, their labor and resources. And that chain has simply been taken over by the two competing nation states who do not care a lick about what the Kashmiri people want. They just want their land and resources. Both countries have been trying to manufacture consent through movies, propaganda, and so on for decades, which is why you see random commenters who've been alive for 2 seconds acting like they own Kashmiri land. The entitlement is unreal, it's giving Israeli, to be blunt. The Mughals did nothing to help alleviate the region from poverty. They just used it as a summer retreat for nobles. The Afghans literally sold Kashmiri people as slaves back to Afghanistan and also had a brutal taxation system on the region's Kashmiri shawls and textiles. Folks abroad will know Kashmir, right? Well, this is the millionth reminder of where that comes from. Anyway, the Afghans crippled the textile industry in the region. The next came the Sikhs, who also treated the native Kashmiris like serfs and had a two-tiered justice system in place for the Muslim and Dalit Kashmiris who made up a majority of the labor class. In 1846, the British East India Company, here's your reminder again that they were a corporation, defeated the Sikh Empire in the First Anglo-Sikh War. The land of Kashmir and the Kashmiri people were then sold by the British to the Dogras as a commodity. Gulab Singh, a Dogra who served as the ruler of Jammu in the Sikh Empire, chose to betray them and side with the British. The British sold Kashmir to Gulab Singh for 7.5 million rupees, which is like $87,700 or something. Gulab Singh and his Dogra successors imposed further extortionate taxes on the Kashmiris in an attempt to recoup that 7.5 million rupee investment they had paid the British. They also continued to aid the British demand for money, muscle, and resources, which meant that Kashmiris were forced to fight in both world wars as well. Dogra rule was known as the worst phase of economic extortion for the Kashmiri people who were being squeezed by both the British and the Dogra rulers. Kashmiris were banned from holding land, making most of them landless peasants. Between 50 and 75% of all cultivated crops were sent straight to Dogra rulers and landlords, leaving the Kashmiris with no control over their own produce. The Dogras also reintroduced a system called Begar, which was a system of unpaid to low-paid forced labor enforced by the Dogra state. Every single profession was taxed, but the Dogras reached even further, taxing Kashmiri Muslims who wanted to get married. This is already ridiculous, but then the Dogras introduced the Zaildari tax, which, I kid you not, was a tax on the cost of taxation itself, a tax of a tax. During this time, Kashmiri Pandits, the native Hindu Brahmin population who made up the businessmen and the landowner class, were better off as a result of the Dogra rulers and British favoring them. Like in virtually all other parts of India in this era, they were allowed to own land, have upper class jobs, and to work as teachers and civil servants for the British, because remember, caste is simply a system of resource management and control that the Christian, British, and all other ruling parties, no matter if they were Hindu or Muslim, benefited by. I mean, the British literally had caste-based military units, so this isn't unique to Kashmir. This again, like other parts of India, created a situation where a large majority, in this case Muslims and Dalits, were landless peasants. Intermarriage would only happen among the poor and landless. This was simply a reality all over the region and all across India. To further make things worse for the peasantry, the Dogra also replaced Kosher, the native language of Kashmiris, with Urdu as the official language, which made it harder for Kashmiri Muslims to break out of poverty and get jobs that required Urdu. This is merely an oversimplified history of the realities endured by the Kashmiri people since the 1500s. I encourage you to use this as a jumping off point and read. And if you were paying attention, you'd realize that this Hindu-Muslim yelling that the government and all its right wing supporters are doing by baying for revenge and so on, it's all smoke and mirrors. It hides an obvious class divide, which is exactly where the discontent stems from. The Kashmiri people have not been allowed to speak for themselves even after Indian independence. India became independent, but Kashmir did not. While mainstream Indian society in the north plays propaganda films like the Kashmir Files and pats themselves on the back for how the traitorous Muslims must be dominated and so on, the peasant Kashmiris and their descendants, who make up a majority of the area, are not given any voice. Instead, it's like a wall of Indians who feel entitled to a place whose history they don't even know, whose real history they aren't even taught. The struggle of the Kashmiri working class Muslims has been reduced to one of mere religious identity, as though the religion they were born into makes their anger and concerns invalid. After independence, things didn't get much better for the Kashmiris. The Dogra ruler Hari Singh still ruled over them and wanted to keep this kingdom separate from Pakistan and India. However, Pashtun tribesmen from Pakistan tried to invade the region, and that's when he agreed to join India in October 1947. Nehru, India's first prime minister, sent troops to protect the region from a Pakistani invasion. Hari Singh signed an instrument to accede the state to the Indian Dominion. Article 370 granted Kashmir's autonomy in the Indian Union. This article was also added to the constitution as a direct outcome of the agreement with the Dogra king. However, this autonomous status was a farce, and the elections have been rigged in the region by Delhi, the capital, making democracy just a scam in Kashmir. India wanted to keep control of Kashmir through authoritarian rule, and the 70s and 80s were a time of great discontent in the country. Landless peasants were rising from Bengal to the Red Corridor with the Maoist uprisings and more. So, to keep control over the Kashmiri people and their land, India needed to implement military rule. The government passed the Public Safety Act in 1978, which allowed the military to detain anyone, and I mean anyone, for any reason without trial or conviction. This direct military rule, which for the Kashmiris was just a continuation of violence and exploitation that they had seen from the Dogra rulers, the Sikhs, the Afghans, and the Mughals, the people who were once colonized by the British not long ago, had become full-fledged colonizers, using military force to kill or detain anyone who threatened their grip. Not even democracy itself would get in the way. In 1987, the Indian state was really trying to channel their inner America. They had invaded Sri Lanka to try and emulate their own Vietnam by meddling in the Tamil liberation struggle. The Indian military had invaded Jaffna in the north of Sri Lanka, where they'd essentially tried to disarm the LTTE, who were predominantly Hindus, by the way. A mixture of hubris and incompetence of the government and army at the time had caused the Indian military to lose complete control of the situation, leading to an almost 4-year-long, shameful and unnecessary war with the Tamil Hindus of the region. The Indian military would go on to commit a vast amount of war crimes that most Indians today will not even know about. Also, because it is rather inconvenient for the government's Hindu-Muslim binary politics. Watch Arun's work if you'd like to know more about this region and its history. During those turbulent times in the late 80s, Kashmir was about to have another election. The military's occupation forced disappearances of Kashmiris under the Congress government at the time was obviously not working. There were numerous reports that elections were violently rigged by physically capturing polling stations and not allowing large swaths of the population to vote. This hardline anti-democratic stance by the Indian military against the Kashmiri people would be enough to push many over the edge and turn to taking arms themselves. Any and all protests were met with military gunfire, not just tear gas or rubber bullets, but also live ammunition. You'd think governments would know by now that if you make peace impossible for a people, then you make conflict, violence, and resistance inevitable. By giving the Kashmiri people no out, no release in the pressure valve, the military had lost control of the people. Even teachers and regular people who had routinely seen their family members harassed, killed, tortured, or worse had decided that enough was enough. If they weren't even going to get the right to vote, India didn't leave them with a choice. The Indian military's failure in basic governance naturally also led people to radicalize even further, and it ironically empowered Islamist extremists who were once sidelined by Kashmiris seeking a secular state with self determination to also come to prominence. If India had administered this region better by letting Kashmiris govern themselves, then this situation where 27 innocent men lost their lives wouldn't have happened. In retaliation, Kashmiri rebels began to assassinate the unelected governors and administrators. And I have to mention this regardless of religion, because most Indians unfortunately don't understand that this isn't just about religion, this is about military occupation. The effects of people virtually having no rights and not allowing people a voice in how they are governed. Things had come to a boiling point, and as a reaction, the Indian government had deployed the CRPF, who on January 21st, 1990, committed one of the worst massacres in Kashmiri history. A group of unarmed peaceful protesters had gathered at the Gaukadal bridge, and the Indian military just opened fire without warning. Every Indian textbook has a picture and a chapter about the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. But most Indians probably don't know about these kinds of senseless killings that the Indian military inflicts on our own people even up until recently. Bodies covered the bridge, and an estimated 50 to 60 innocent people were killed. Incidents like this, when the Indian army failed in basic governance, laid the groundwork for events like the Kashmiri Pandit Exodus in the same year, when 100,000 Kashmiri Brahmins left Kashmir. Many of them also were killed by insurgents. This event, as we know, has been used again and again by the Modi government to play the Hindu-Muslim binary card. A badly made propaganda film was also made about it, using the atrocity for pure political gain, completely ignoring the obvious boomerang effect the Indian military invited upon itself. The interesting thing about the Indian commenters online, who are literally calling for drone strikes right now and more policing and militarization, is that it's already been tried. It's not working, and it never will. The reality here is that the governments involved have done a terrible job ensuring the safety of civilians. Doesn't matter if it's the corrupt Pakistani government or the Indian government, I'm just talking from the point of view of an Indian citizen myself. Kashmir is already the most militarized zone in the world. In 2023 itself, the Modi government deployed 10 additional military companies into the valley. In 2019, India moved 50,000 military personnel into the region to add to the 700,000 military personnel already stationed there. This alone should be embarrassing for the Modi government, that even those numbers and Indian taxpayer money has done nothing to stop the unrest in Kashmir, Manipur, or in Bastar. Not only this, the Indian army has seized over 54,000 acres of land in the occupied region. And after the abrogation of Kashmir's special status in 2019, the Modi government has also put an end to a requirement instituted in 1971, under which Indian occupying forces in Kashmir had to get a special certificate in order to take hold of land in Kashmir. The Indian state has also made changes in several acts and laws to permit the construction of permanent structures on Indian armed forces encampments for troops and their families, as well as on areas marked as desired or strategic by the Indian military themselves. What is the extent of this colonization project? And why does it sound exactly like what Israel has been doing? So, if you're here to join in on the gross 2000s era Islamophobia hate train and call for more violence in the region and use this to justify more violence against other Indian Muslims as revenge across India who have nothing to do with this event, you are misguided. What we need to be focusing on is why the resistance group exists in the first place, the specifics of what it is that the Indian military is doing in Kashmir that is forcing the people to even need to form resistance groups. What are they resisting? This isn't a Bollywood movie, this is real life with real people. So the question is, what is the Modi government going to do next? And will the Indian people stop this unending game of the government? This Hindu Muslim game that the parties have been using to gain votes, a game they learned from the British. Will the Indian people stand with the Kashmiris and other minorities, or are we going to turn our backs on them?